Welcome everyone to this briefing brought to you by the Israel Defense and Security Forum, IDSF. We need to talk today about the Houthis. There was again an attack, an attempted strike on Israel today by the Houthis. Joining me to discuss this issue is an expert, Noa Lazimi from the Misgav Institute. Noa, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
It's a great pleasure to have you back. Let's just jump in. We here in Israel tend to view the Houthis as a proxy of the regime in Iran. And it's interesting that it was recently reported that a satellite company linked to the Chinese government has been providing intelligence to the Houthis to facilitate their attacks on U.S. vessels. So is it possible that what's happening right now in Yemen and the interest of the U.S. to attack the Houthis is really part of a bigger trade war between the U.S. and China?
That shouldn't surprise us at all. The Chinese have been supporting the Houthis in various form for a while now. And so there is evidence to show that as early as November 2023, the Chinese provided military components and dual-use equipment to aid the Houthis' attacks against commercial ships in exchange for immunity. And there are other forms of support, less direct ones, for example, by purchasing Iranian oil. In fact, Iran's maybe biggest consumer is China. In 2024, more than 90% of oil exports were destined to Beijing. And now the IRGC uses these oil revenues to support the activity of various proxy groups across the region, the Houthis included. So in answer to your question, I wouldn't refer to it as a trade war tactic by China in the traditional sense, but it's absolutely part of the broader geopolitical competition with the US, and there are some financial aspects involved. Obviously, disruption of the global supply chains, and that gives China economic leverage when the Western economies get hurt, while China enjoys this immunity for the most part. But I think even more critically, the Chinese benefit from US investing a lot of resources in the Middle East, in the Yemeni arena, a resource that could have been allocated in the Indo-Pacific region instead.
Thank you so much. So we know, of course, that the U.S. is aggressively striking the Houthis in Yemen. To what extent have these U.S. airstrikes actually debilitated the Houthis? How much infrastructure has been destroyed? How badly are they hurting right now?
I think that the current U.S. operation in Yemen marks a positive shift in the U.S. strategy against the Houthis. And I think Trump's objective is twofold. The main goal is to degrade Houthi military capabilities and to force them to cease attacks against commercial ships in the Red Sea. And there is another goal, to pressure their main backer, to pressure Iran, and send a clear message that Tehran will be accountable for Houthi aggression. Now, there have been several steps taken by this administration that show that they take it seriously and they reflect a more aggressive approach. So for one, we've seen the American bombers making their way to Diego Garcia. There was the recent deployment of the second aircraft carrier to the Middle East. And lastly, of course, the very intensive air campaign. Now, just to illustrate the intensity of this air offensive, so we're talking about way more frequent airstrikes, very powerful one. Just last week, it was reported that the US conducted 50 airstrikes in one night, and that's very typical. It's not a one-off. And also, the geographical scope of the strikes has extended to include additional provinces in Yemen. So we see a lot of them in infrastructures. So obviously, we talk about radar systems, weapon and launch sites, fuel ports, bases, shelters, and others. In terms of the numbers of terrorists killed, so there was a report recently published that showed that the U.S. has killed over 500 Houthi fighters. And that's an achievement, but I think we should not delude ourselves that this is a major blow to the terror organization, because our estimations as to the size of the Houthi army or the entire Houthi force, the estimations range between tens of thousands to even a couple of hundred thousands. But still, having said that, their leadership suffer casualties. We're talking mainly about mid-level commanders, and I don't think that was the case in previous U.S. operations.
When we look at Israel's goals in Gaza, they include to completely destroy Hamas, whereas Israel hasn't ever claimed it wants to, let's say, completely destroy Hezbollah, but rather deter Hezbollah. So, with regards to the Houthis, whether it's Israel's interests or the U.S. goals, is the goal to destroy the terror group or just to suppress it, to deter it? And is that strategy working?
How is that strategy working? I think that's a great question. Um, I think we have to acknowledge that there is a determined, consistent crushing of the rebel group taking place at the moment. However, as much as this offensive, the air offensive, is powerful, I don't think that airstrikes can be enough. They only have limited effect. And so, in order to win decisively against the Houthis, I don't see any other option but a ground invasion. Now, the US, as far as I know, does not intend to eliminate the entire terror organization until the last Houthi operative, nor does it intend to send boots on the ground to Yemen. However, um, the air offensive has significantly helped the local forces in terms of giving them the boost in their fight against the Houthis. We've just heard that the Yemeni government started recruiting soldiers in preparation for ground operation on Hodeidah, ground assault on Hodeidah. And now this can be a game changer because the Hodeidah port is the economic and military lifeline of the Houthis, being the main smuggling route from Iran, but also a major source of revenue. We're talking about nearly $2 billion per year. So what I'm trying to say here is that, well, I mean, we should not underestimate the air offensive that is taking place. It has proven effective, but it must be complemented by and coordinated with a ground assault by Yemeni forces. And I will just add one last point that there should be also a coordinated international effort to isolate the Houthis financially. When Trump took office, right after he became president, he redesignated the Yemeni militia as a foreign terrorist organization. Now, the FTO designation is important in the context of prosecuting entities that give military support to the Houthis.
You mentioned the need for a ground operation. There have been ground operations in the past, and they have failed. The Houthis is not a new terrorist group. So, what are some of the reasons past efforts to stop the Houthis have failed? And are there any lessons that we've learned that we can apply to today?
Definitely. I think we have to look to the Saudi experience. Just want to remind our audience that there was a coalition against the Houthis formed in 2015, a decade ago, by the Saudis with the support of countries in the region. But that coalition relied heavily on airstrikes, and not only, but mostly airstrikes. So that proved as a disadvantage. But they also imposed a siege, or to say the least, a naval blockade that restricted Houthi access to outside supplies. However, we know that that had to stop because there was a escalating humanitarian crisis, very severe crisis ongoing in Yemen, and under U.S. pressure and the entire international community, they had to remove this blockade. But the bottom line is that the Saudis and the other countries that supported the coalition were not able to defeat the Houthi insurgency. So we have to understand why. I mean, there are many factors. I'll just focus on two of those factors. So one is the massive Iranian support that has been provided to the Houthis. And we're talking about a spy ship in the Red Sea that provides them intelligence to attack other ships. We're talking about IRGC commanders or personnel stationed on Yemeni soil, help them coordinate different operations, and also the formidable smuggling network. Now, I'm not talking just about the Hodeidah and Al Salif ports. These are like the more familiar entry points, but there are other alternatives. So, for example, from Iranian ports, arms are transferred through the Arabian Sea to, for example, the Oman Bay or to Somalia. And from there, they are boarded on these small, rapid boats that make the way to the southern coast of Yemen and then again transported by land. An additional smuggling route is also the one, the land crossing. There is a border with Oman, so there is this land crossing where they move dual-use components or arms in trucks through this crossing and then to Houthi-controlled areas. Now they disguise those components or arms by putting generators and also communications devices. So I just wanted to illustrate that this is a critical element in the Houthi success. Another important factor is the lack of uniform military action among the local anti-Houthi forces operating in Yemen. So people have to understand that Yemen doesn't function as a single cohesive entity. It's fragmented into various zones, each controlled by a different group or tribe. Now, there are the forces supported by the internationally recognized government of Yemen, headed by Al-Naimi, President Al-Naimi, and with headquarters in Aden. There is another additional body, which is very important, the STC, the Southern Transitional Council. They control territories along the southern coast of Yemen. And just to name another important group is the force headed by Tariq Saleh. He's the nephew of late Yemeni President Ali Abdallah Saleh. And his main area of activity is the western coast. Again, there are others. We won't be able to cover all of the forces operating against the Houthis, but because some of them are engaged in disputes, then it's really hard to move effectively. So I think one of the efforts that should be done is also, it's essential that the US and other countries in the region, especially Saudi Arabia or the United Arab Emirates, that are already involved, more indirectly today, but still they're involved. And so obviously to back those bodies militarily, but also to try perhaps to bridge the gaps between some of these groups in order to create a more coordinated and effective effort against the Houthis.
No, I very much appreciate you taking all of my questions. I have a question for you, but also for all of our wonderful viewers. So for all of our viewers tuning in, I want you to share your comments below so that we can really get a sense of what you're thinking, and you can see if your thoughts are in line with Noah's answer to this question, which is as follows. In the last Houthi attack on Israel, Israel did not retaliate, right? Israel was relying on the US to fight the Houthis. So the Houthis send ballistic missiles to Israel, and Israel is silent. Noah, do you think that was the right call? How should Israel respond now that they are being continued attacked by the Houthis? So for all of our viewers, share your comments below. And Noah, let's hear what you think about this issue.
Right. So the US basically told Israel, leave the Houthis to us. We will take care of them. It was the beginning of the operation in Yemen. And there's no doubt that there is a lot of firepower in the region and other resources that we mentioned. And the US can definitely and is doing a serious job with the Houthis to suppress the Houthis. However, I do think that now with attacks against Israel, now that we see that they have been resumed with ballistic missiles against Israel, targeting Haifa, for example, and other places, Israel must ask itself, is it wise not to retaliate? So we have to think about how we are perceived, how we can preserve this deterrent image. So what I'm saying here is that we should maximize the coordination with the US that's already existent in order to initiate talks as to the possibility of Israel joining perhaps the air offensive, either now in response to the latest developments with the Houthis or in future incidents. And make no mistakes, there will be future incidents. The Houthis are likely to continue this occasional launching of missiles and drones because this is the way they project power both locally and in the region. So locally, it helps them to rally support at home, kind of like deflecting the blame for the dire situation at home to external actor. And on the regional level, it also serves them in terms of signaling that they're independent and that they should be taken into account. So this way they stay relevant, they stay involved in with the Palestinian issue, but also with regards to other developments in the Middle East.
It has been reported that the Houthis have now formed ties with other terrorist organizations in the region. To what extent are they now independent, and to what extent are they still very much dependent on the regime in Iran?
In principle, the Houthis are not a typical Iranian proxy. It's true that Iran has provided them with a lot of support, logistically, economically, militarily, and we mentioned that. And they depend on Tehran. However, they make sure to communicate that they're independent, that they are sovereign, and that they have their own policies they pursue. So it comes in the form of these public messages, but also we've seen over the years that they have developed this quite solid infrastructure for arms production. So even if you cut off the smuggling network, which obviously will damage them substantially, but they will survive because they are able now to produce on their own. Now, the partnership with other terror organizations, for example, Al-Shabaab in the Horn of Africa and other organizations, it's part of this effort to diversify the weapon supply and also advance mutual goals.
Noah, thank you so much for all of this. Final question. We've learned so much from you, and then you're off the hook. When we look at the big picture of threats in the Middle East, certainly a nuclear Iran is at the top of the list, as well as a continuation of Hamas activities in Gaza, among others. And Israel needs U.S. leadership in the Middle East. And right now, that leadership, at least on the military front, is focused on the Houthis. Is that a good thing? Would it be better for the U.S. to shift their military efforts from the Houthis to Iran or to Gaza?
I believe that US leadership is very much present to begin with. And I think that each arena, each front has its own unique obstacles, unique challenges. So if we look at Gaza, for example, I think that a lot of Washington's attention is on reaching a hostage release agreement, but it's Hamas who is repeatedly refusing to such a deal, conditioning any agreement on Israeli full withdrawal from the Gaza Strip and immediate end to the war. Now, while some people believe that this is a legitimate and even necessary price to pay to get our hostages back, from the perspective of the Israeli government, this is simply unacceptable. If Israel is constrained in terms of resuming the war afterwards, if in practice it wouldn't be able to go back to fighting, it will leave Hamas in power, and which is a catastrophe in itself. And so that's for Gaza. When we talk about Iran, again, it's complicated. Unlike Biden, with Trump, at least the military option is not off the table. But still, we know that Trump prefers a deal at the moment. So he's pursuing a deal that will not allow Tehran to acquire a nuclear weapon. Unfortunately, I'm not convinced that the diplomatic channel is the right way to achieve it. I think the Iranians are simply trying to buy valuable time for their rapidly expanding nuclear program, and at the same time also avoid the activation of the snapback mechanism. So basically, coming to the negotiation table for the Iranians is just a manipulative tactic to advance their goals without really, let's say, willingness to make real concessions. So ultimately, Israel will have to set its red lines in speaking with the administration and see how it can promote, let's say, the Libyan formula, which means that Iran, sorry, will have to dismantle all the nuclear facilities and enrichment sites, chemicals, everything related to the nuclear program. In addition, there is also the idea that there shouldn't be any expiration date to this deal. It's also an important red line. And lastly, in the background, we have to have a credible military threat if progress is not achieved.
Noa Lazimi from the Misgav Institute, thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you to all of our viewers and supporters for tuning into this briefing. We'll be back with you tomorrow, 10 a.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. here in Israel. Until then, stay safe, stay strong. Take care, everyone.